Hello, hello. Thank you for joining me. This is my third day sharing the passages that are most prominent to me and my synthesis of the focus topics covered in book 31 of my Book a Week series, Alan Watts' Beyond Theology. Alan Watts shares that he believes that an examination of what we desire is one of the most enriching ways to understand ourselves and to understand what it means to be human in general. I want to talk a little bit about this today. I have done a lot of examination of my own desires, and I this morning was thinking of 3 ways to illustrate this in order that it can really resonate. One of them is a terribly common desire. Many people identify with desiring to appear to be in shape. I'm thinking about how many people I've heard comment about wanting to have a 6-pack. And I think about what is involved truly with having a 6-pack and what that means about endurance and sacrifice, and what it means about the decision making day in, day out, and sustainable behavioral shifting. What it means about the way that we plan ahead when we are going to a social event, and the way that we decide to refrain. When it really comes down to what it takes to have a 6-pack, our expression about wanting a 6-pack can and maybe should change. Do we want everything that is involved? Another illustration of this has to do with raising children. I think about most of the moments of frustration or resistance to what is happening that I experience in my day-to-day life as a mother. And I can't help but laugh at an understanding of the incompatibility between what I actually want and what I think I want in that moment that is creating that frustration. Let me be more specific. Typically when I'm frustrated, if I take a moment to examine what is actually happening, what is typically happening is that I'm expecting that my daughter has development that it would be impossible at her age. I'm expecting that she would have more capacity to broaden her perspective, to understand what's happening, to maneuver with her emotions and her impulses than is appropriate for a 4-year-old. And every time I pull my lens back in order to achieve that sight, I can't help but laugh at myself and really enjoy the recollection that what I'm connecting to in that moment of constricted perspective that I'm experiencing because of my inability to handle my emotions and my impulses is this desire that she's a grown-up, which isn't really what I want. I had a child. I'm growing a family because I want to raise a child. I want her to be 4. That's quite an awakening every time I allow it. Another example of this has to do with something a little more complicated. Do I really want bliss? When I am resisting the beginning of a meditation session, and I ask myself about why that might be, and my inner dialogue begins, and I remember that equanimity that I've felt before, and I wonder inevitably why I wouldn't move toward that, why I'm resisting that incredible feeling of peace. I think that my quest in this human form is in an organic movement back and forth between remembering and forgetting. I think that in my human form, I am quite delighted with forgetting as I am with remembering. And I think that I enjoy that movement back and forth, the process of peekaboo. And I think that in a way, fear pops up when I am experiencing equanimity. And it has a quality of homesickness about it. I think that I'm remembering something that feels like a greater eternal home. I'm experiencing the tension, I think, between my desire to surrender into an enduring equanimity and my desire to continue the movement, the rhythm in my peekaboo. It's an interesting contemplation, worth a lot more time. Without further ado, I will love to know from you what your examination of your desires has brought up for you. And I'll move on toward today's readings. Enjoy.
Page 84. My regret is rather that we shall never see the rich potentialities of this way of life fulfilled, nor realize that the Christian mythos has the possibility of blossoming into the most joyously exuberant, swinging, colorful, and liberated religion there ever was. Heaven need not wait for the grave. But to reach the point of even seeing such a possibility, the basic design of traditional Christianity must first become clear. Only in terms of this design can the particular dogmas, doctrines, and symbols be related together. The more penetrating one's self-awareness, the more it seems that life is a desperately elaborate game of one-upmanship, in which one pursues one's own selfish purposes under the many disguises of duty, love, public-spiritedness, and devotion to ideals. Christianity stresses the idea that salvation or union with God is a gift, and that the incarnation is the sole means of this gift. There's absolutely no way of earning, deserving, or manufacturing salvation. It comes only as the grace or favor of God's love for man and the world. However, once this gift has been received, it is said to empower the individual to perform works pleasing unto the Lord, and further, that if such works do not emerge, the individual will be at fault for not appreciating the gift and not making use of his divine talent. Here we can come right to the nub of the scheme. What does one do to receive effective grace? That is, grace that becomes fully realized in works of love. The problem is simply that innumerable people who have apparently fulfilled all the requirements, belief, prayer, reception of the sacraments, etc., have found no significant change in their moral behavior except, perhaps, a deeper duplicity than ever. Page 92. Holiness, however, is usually taken to include goodness, or at least a vigorous effort to attain it, even if quite unsuccessful. Holiness is very hard to describe, but quite unmistakable when met with in the flesh. A wise innocence, a relaxed intensity, a humorous humility, a supernatural naturalness, an unsentimental devotion. all wrapped up in an atmosphere which is vaguely scary. For the holy man is numinous. He radiates something of the Shekinah, the light of glory, the presence of the Most High. Page 93. For holiness is the life of spontaneity and self-abandonment with humor, which includes the wisdom of serpents as well as the gentleness of doves, because humor is nothing other than perfect self-awareness. It is the delighted recognition of one's own absurdity and a loving cynicism with respect to one's own pretensions. A person who has learned to be fully self-aware can safely return to living by impulse. Humor is the transformation of anxiety into laughter, the same trembling but with a different meaning. Holy humor is the discovery of the ultimate joke on oneself, and this is why Dante heard the song of the angels as the laughter of the universe. Page 96. Now it appears that the real intent of God's first and greatest commandment is to tell the sons of Adam to persist as hard as they can in that primal sin of trying to control spontaneity. Thou shalt love. Thou shalt be artificially natural. Thou shalt try not to try. Thou shalt willfully give up thine own will. Thou shalt attempt for the next 5 minutes not to think of a green elephant. Presumably, then, the Lord believes with William Blake that the fool who persists in his folly will become wise. Should anyone try to control this mounting confusion or simply relax and let things take their course? And then, could any of us really let go, even if it seemed the best thing to do? Such questions have been asked before, but never with the earnestness that events will soon force upon us. How can they be answered by the type of man who's brought these problems about? Faced with this crisis, the egocentric style of personality will merely turn brutal, and there will be a frightful struggle for the survival of some elite group. The infinitely judicious combination of doing nothing and interfering intelligently that will be required calls for human beings with a new sensation of identity. And this new sensation of identity could come about within the framework of Christianity if Christians understood the way in which their religion works as an upaya, as a systematic and formidably consistent egocentricity designed to explode into theocentricity, the realization of being oneself with God. Page 102. I may be able to control my passions and appetites, but in what spirit am I controlling them? Is it, after all, to admire myself for my moral strength, and not for any genuine love of God or of my brethren? With this insight, I know that somehow the spirit in which the discipline is followed must be changed. I must do all for the pure love of God, but I do not have the power to evoke such love by my own will. What am I to do then? For I see that even in praying for the grace to love purely, I am trying to work some indirect magic, to find some trick, some psychic technique, some spiritual gimmick to compel the grace of God. How do I not want to do that? This point is really the height of egocentricity, the final achievement of controlling my own letting go of myself, to be able to say when to become the perfect instrument of the Spirit, and yet to have done it myself, to be able to evoke union with God at will, and above all, by the stratagem of willing not to will it, for it seems to come just when I say, "Oh God, let it come or not come as you will." Page 103. At this point of crisis, what is the right question to ask? What shall we do? Is clearly the wrong question, because we know we cannot do what must be done. The better question is, what does it mean that we are in this crisis? What does our situation tell us about the way in which we've been acting, and about who or what we have believed ourselves to be?